Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lean Into Your Superpower. We are Kathleen and Zaina, aka the Lion and the Ram. And we've built an entire podcast on harnessing and utilizing your superpower.
And our wish is for this to be a safe place for all of you and for us to talk about what is our superpower, why is knowing our superpower important, and harnessing our superpower.
Right. And last week, this is our third episode. Last week, we discussed finding your superpower, and one of the main blocks that hinders you from authentically leaning in and finding your superpower is the imposter syndrome. So today we will be talking about tackling the imposter syndrome as a means to finding your superpower. Imposter syndrome is the kryptonite, I think, to your superpower. And so our title for our podcast today is Imposter Syndrome, Your Superpower Kryptonite. It is key to recognize what's holding us back and draining our authentic self. Otherwise, we really won't be able to move forward and move towards finding our path and purpose. So we are super, super excited to be here with you today. So as always, before we kind of dive into the meat of what we're going to be discussing today, we like to do a check-in. I always like to check in with Kathleen. We call it our weekly check-ins. How are you, Kathleen? How has the last few weeks been going for you?
I am good today. I'm one of those people that wakes up in the morning with like lots of energy and is like, today's going to be great, and I tell my kids, like, I love a good Monday, and my kids are like, oh, Monday. And I'm like, no, it's great. So I'm one of those really annoying people that loves a good Monday.
I didn't know that about you. I didn't know.
So recently it's been Thanksgiving. So we spent time with our family, and interestingly enough, we are not invited to my husband's Thanksgiving, his family's Thanksgiving. And I don't think it's because they don't want us there. It's just because they know that we can't come because they're doing it on a different day than they normally do. But they didn't articulate that. And they just sent us a picture of all of them together. And we're like, Happy Thanksgiving. We're like,
so okay. They didn't let you know that they were even
no.
Okay.
So we're like, well, I'm happy you guys are all together. Happy Thanksgiving. So it's his family is just funny like that. So last minute, no notice. That's the kind of thing they do. And they know that my family always gets together on Thanksgiving. So
well, it seems like you're taking it pretty well. Like, has it been like how it's been feeling about that?
It's just one of those things you're like, okay, sounds good. I'm glad it was good. And we had Thanksgiving with my family. And when you talk about imposter syndrome, we'll get into it for sure in more detail, but I definitely think it can stem from our childhoods and our interactions with our family. I mean, nothing makes you feel more of it like an imposter as when you walk back into like your family's house and you feel like you're 5 years old again. So that's always a good time. So my mom left me this armoire. Actually, it's my grandmother's, but she gave me this armoire, and I told her I wanted to paint it. And she clearly had some feelings about me painting it. So I left it at my grandmother's house. I didn't take it. And she's like, well, why didn't you take it? And I said, well, you clearly had feelings about me, painting it. And I don't really want to have, constraints on how I use this thing. It should be for how I want to use it. And if you're going to be upset about me painting it, I don't really want to take it. And she was like, well, I just don't want you to ruin it. And I'm like, okay, well, don't you think I can like research this and figure out like how to do this, how to paint an armoire? And she says to me, no, I don't. I'm like, oh, well, thank you for the vote of confidence. I think I could do it. But so that was a good vote of confidence. So if you are struggling with imposter syndrome and your mother tells you you do not have the ability to effectively paint an armoire, that is going to probably trigger something inside of you about not being good enough.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of amazing how when you said, when we go back and see our parents and we revert back to the old, like allowing them to talk to you like they talked to you when you were, like you said, 5 years old, and
Right.
and knowing that's not your authentic self anymore, and almost feeling like they don't really know who I am. I feel that way quite a lot
Yes.
when I'm around my
Yes.
family, and we're going into, obviously we just finished Thanksgiving, we're going into the holidays. I bet a lot
Right.
of people, this could be also, their experience too, because they're always, unless you had a good relationship with them as you got older and they
Yeah.
really understood how you changed in college and
Right.
beyond, they're still going to see you. I'm 40 something years old. They're still going to see me as that, just the same dynamic, the
The
same
little kid. Yeah. And I've changed a lot over the years. And the thing is, I definitely don't have it all down. I don't have all the work down. I still have lots of work to do, but not being triggered by that was really great, because I know that that's coming from my mom's feelings about this armoire. And she has a lot she doesn't want anything to change from what my grandparents had and all that. And that's her way of holding on to them.
Right.
And that's why I don't want to take it and mess with it, because I know that's her thing.
Right.
And until she works through that, I don't really want to get into the middle of it. So being able to kind of separate the fact that she was saying this to me and she's kind of insulting me and my ability, but it's really not about that. It's really about her feelings about their stuff.
Right.
So
yeah. So that kind of segues us directly into, what is imposter syndrome and how do you know if you have it? So I did some research. I'm kind of the researcher, I guess. It's just my, I'm just naturally inclined. So imposter syndrome, according to Webster Dictionary, is the feeling of being a bit of a fraud, and the fear of other people realizing it. Even if in reality you absolutely deserve all the success you have. And it affects typically mostly high achieving people. Now, this was my research find. Now, originally it was tagged, or I guess it was started, to be known that it was mostly being applicable to high achieving women, which is to me really, really interesting, because in my coaching and consulting work and with businesses, I work with a lot of high achieving women. And I also work with a lot of high achieving men. And I mostly see the women, including yourself, Kathleen, coming to me like, I feel this, even though they're like at the top of their game and they're doing, and they're growing and they're and they're the boss, the CEOs, the owners, and they're still like feeling this way. So I'm not saying it only applies to women, but I do think, especially in my experience and in my opinion, what I do and what I've seen, it's typically seems to affect mostly high achieving women.
Yes, I would agree that it typically seems to show up in mainly women. I've in the legal field among women, it has been said that a lot of women wish they had the confidence of the average white male. That's what I hear.
Right.
And there's something to that. Not saying that, the average white male doesn't have, the right to have some confidence, but I think we need to step up our game and have some more confidence in that way. And when I started looking at imposter syndrome in my life and how does that show up, and I realized just how fear-based it really is. And that kind of surprised me. I didn't really think about it in that way, as being a fear. And fear is something that I intentionally try to battle. And if I'm afraid of something, I really want to take it on, because I want to move past that fear, because I know that fear is just a feeling. It's not reality. It's not an indicator of actual danger. It's just an indicator that I'm moving out of my comfort zone, and I take active steps to move out of my comfort zone so that I can grow. And so when I looked at this imposter syndrome, I was surprised that really, when you get down to the root of how this plays out and what your inner thoughts are, it's really fear that's driving you.
And it's interesting that you said something about confidence, because I do think sometimes we show to the world, look at me, I'm so confident. But really, it's more about the self-talk inside and the self-doubt
Right.
that you're experiencing on the inside. And this isn't research, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I believe, where I am today, in my opinion, that that women kind of get this or feel this a little bit more is because we're just kind of more in touch with our emotional side.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Right.
so and we tend to have I'm not saying women have more anxiety or depression, but anxiety and depression often accompany imposter syndrome. And that is from an accredited source. So it's, it's just kind of like, okay, well, we're just more attuned emotionally. So it kind of makes sense that we're like constantly kind of self-doubting, feeling restless and nervous, and the negative self-talk maybe more so than the average, white male. That's a high achiever as well.
Right. Well, I think as a society, we put more pressure on women to do it all and to do it all flawlessly. And I don't think men have really as much pressure for that as women do, because it's more socially acceptable for a man to just work. And then he's not responsible for, rearing the children, doing sick days, doing doctor's appointments, all that sort of stuff. Whereas as moms or women who work, we're still responsible for those things, and we're supposed to work like we don't have kids. So I think that can lead to this feeling of, well, I want to be at this level at my job, but I'm so scattered because of all these other obligations that I've taken on. I'm making these mistakes, and these mistakes then mean that I'm not good enough and I'm an imposter and I'm never going to be able to do.
Right. And as a side note to that, I just saw something recently. I don't have this so cited, but I can find it. It was I think she was a Harvard law professor or business professor, but she was saying how it's now been shown, and I think I sent this to you, Kathleen, that you know where I'm going with this. I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit, but where women, oh yeah, this is what it is. Women and minorities, in order to be promoted, they have to overachieve.
Right.
When men are, and this is actual research that actually showed that this is something that we kind of always knew to be true, but now there's research backing it. Whereas men are promoted based on their potential, or white men. I don't know if they talk.
Right.
White men are promoted based on their potential, whereas minorities, you always are promoted based on their achievement, or
what they've actually achieved.
Or what they've achieved. Right. Overly achieved, and it's like, oh yeah, now she's ready, versus, you know what, I see something in him. I think he's ready to move on. And that's where kind of the glass ceiling, which I've never really been able to understand more clear. I understand it conceptually, but then now it makes sense to me why there's been this glass ceiling for so long. Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. So some of the things you can do, our listeners, that if you're wondering if you have imposter syndrome, ask yourselves, and most of us know if we have it or we feel it, but things like, do you agonize over the smallest mistakes or flaws in your work or home life or what have you? Do you attribute your success to a lack of outside factor, to luck or outside factors, right? Like, oh, I got here because I was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, versus it's actually you who created, your place of where you are.
Right.
Are you sensitive to even, constructive criticism? Do you feel like you will inevitably be found out as a phony? Always have to put this act. I see this a lot with minority women. The way they talk professionally is not the way they talk outside. And it's just kind of like, it's just a little bit, and I see this with other women too, even when women talking to their boyfriends or husbands, it's like their voice even changes, it's like
it goes up.
Yes. Yeah. And not as a certain more, the voice gets high, but then their effect goes down, do you downplay your own expertise, even in areas where you're generally more skilled than others? I see this quite a lot in what I do.
All the time. Yes. I struggle with that. Well, I've struggled with it, and I'm working to change that with the struggling, downplaying your own expertise. Because I have certain goals that I want to reach in my work. And if I'm telling a client that my work's not that great, they're not going to hire me. And do I really believe my work's not that great? No. I believe that I am good at my job, and I believe that I know what I'm talking about. And I have outside metrics that I can use to measure where my work falls. I can compare it to other people's work. I'm a lawyer, so I can look at what other people have drafted. Is my work up to par with what people have drafted? Is it better? So I think sometimes you can use outside data to try to attack this imposter syndrome. And I might be jumping ahead, but we have to be able to also accept the outside data.
Right.
So,
and I think it's interesting that us as women always kind of be like, look, I got data. I'm just as good as you.
Right.
I'm not saying don't have it. I think, I mean,
Right.
it's a good thing to have, but it's also like, but instead of being like, which what I see typically in men, no data, they just kind of know it. They believe it. When you ask them why, and no one really asks them or pushes back at them, like, what makes you think you're so good?
Right.
Or if they do, the typical response in my experience is, what do you mean? I've achieved this.
Right.
It's always about like, well, I'm a lawyer, I'm smart, I'm this, I'm that.
Right.
Not like, well, look, compared to this person. Whereas I think we, as high achieving women or minorities, tend to do that quite more, because it's like we need like these outside factors to verify, reinforce that we should have a seat at this table.
Right.
So just a side note, imposter syndrome is not a diagnosable mental illness. Instead, it's the term is usually narrowly applied to intelligence and achievement, although it's also has links to perfectionism and social context. And this is from a study that I can credit in the notes section later. But okay, so 5 types of imposter syndrome. Dr. Valerie Young, she is apparently the guru of this area. She's identified 5 types. The perfectionist, and this is the type where imposter were involved believing that unless you were absolutely perfect, you could have done better. Right? Because you feel like an imposter because your perfectionist traits makes you believe that you're not as good as others as you might think, as others might think you are. So
I feel like I have this one. I wouldn't have said that a couple of years ago, but I do feel like I have this one. And for me, I feel like this has shown up as a lack of vulnerability with my staff, because I don't want to be open with my staff about my mistakes or the messes in my life. I've got kids and I've got a husband and I've got these businesses I'm trying to run, and life is inherently messy. And I don't want them to know all of these things, because then it makes it look like, well, I mean, your life is a mess. How are you even qualified to run this business? Or you made this mistake. How are you even qualified to run this business? And so then you're like, okay, well, I've made all these mistakes. I'm not perfect, so I'm not qualified to do this.
Right.
And I feel like it shows up more in highly critical fields like the legal field, because everything we do in our work environment, everything we write, everything we say, everything that we do in a case is under a microscope, and any flaw that comes up is going to be pointed out to you. So this can be really triggering for people who have the perfectionist imposter syndrome, because when we have that one mistake, and there's going to be a mistake because we're all human, it triggers that imposter syndrome. Okay, well, I'm not good enough. They found me out, so.
Right. And we're going to talk about, how, whether some things you can do to combat that. We're not just talking about, all these things. And if you feel like that, too bad, so sad. Like we're going to talk
Right.
about strategies to try to help you overcome that, because it is very, very important to what we're talking about. But I think something that you said that I just want to point out is, I think there's like what we think other people's perceptions are going to be, and then the reality.
Right.
Story that we're
Right.
telling ourselves, really 9.9 times out of 10 is not the actual reality. I don't want to say 100 times, but in my
Right.
almost every single time, what
Right.
we see, how other people see us is not really, or how they see us, like if we make a mistake, is
Right.
not really what they're thinking. Most of the time, when
Yeah.
they do see, they want to know their leaders make mistakes because they want to know they're human.
Right.
Then they can relate to them.
Mhm. Right.
And
And sorry, I feel like imposter syndrome is very much in your own head. This
yeah,
is very much an in your own head sort of thing.
right,
You've created this,
right.
this scenario in your head.
Okay, the next, let's just go on to the other type. It's called the expert. And I think this is where I kind of land more, is the expert feels like an imposter because they don't know everything there is to know about a particular subject or topic, or they haven't mastered every step in the process because there is more for them to learn. They don't feel as if they've reached the rank of expert. I think if there's any of these top imposter syndromes that I can relate to more, it's that. I'm
Yeah.
always kind of like, and when I was more practicing law, I would just literally go down the rabbit hole of shepherdizing
Yes.
for weeks. I could never get out of it because it's always like, and what shepherdizing
Yeah.
is, for people that don't know, is when you research a case and then there's, it opens up, 1,000 other cases that could potentially, be more akin to the facts of, of what you're trying to argue. And you can just kind of keep going and going. And there's this endless cycle versus saying, okay, stop.
Yes.
This is the case that's, the most akin or like, or whatever,
Right.
the legal argument I want to make, or the factual scenario that's similar to it, or both. And so for me, I always feel like, so I am a sponge, and I always have felt like the only way I've been able to achieve what I've been able to achieve is because I've been so much into learning. And if I stop learning or know every single possible step in it, then somehow, I'm going to be found out that I'm not, I shouldn't have the seat at the table, either as a business consultant or, an attorney or even a mom, or even like I'm in a relationship, I'm not married, I'm divorced, but I'm in a relationship, even that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, we feel like we're required, if we are qualified, we're required to know immediately what is the answer. And that's definitely in the legal field, and you have experience with that too. Clients expect that of us. Clients expect for me to look at your scenario and for me to know every law on the books. I know all of them, and I can look at it and say, this is what you did wrong. This is what, your liability is, whatever it is. When in fact, a knowledgeable, experienced attorney knows that laws change all the time. So we need to check them. One little fact can change the analysis. And I think it makes you look more like an expert if you say, well, we have some issues here that can change the analysis. Let me go back and look at this. But it's definitely, I have fallen into that as well. And I see other attorneys do it as well, where they feel like they must come up with an answer off the cuff. Otherwise, it looks like they don't know what they're doing.
And it's not just attorneys, any professional services, really any sort of, even if you're in corporate work, somebody comes to you and, they're your, you're their superior or what have you. And they're like, just looking for you for the answer. And and something that I coach people through is, it's okay to say, and you should actually, even if you know the answer, still do your due diligence and be like, you know what, let me step back for a second.
Right.
When you look at it, and this has also been shown that most attorneys that get disbarred are the ones that have actually been practicing a long period of time. I think it's over 20 years or 30 years. And that's because they get so comfortable, like they know it all, or they think they know it all.
Yes.
They don't, step back. And so they're just giving these like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen because I've been practicing 30 years and this is how it always happens. And then lo and behold, a different decision, or like if you're in the medical field, a different type of, thing comes out and you're not aware of it or what have you.
Right.
So yeah, so it's super, super important to just humble yourself and not feel like you got to know it all. And people actually,
Right.
this is research, can't relate and have a harder time relating to people who are know-it-alls, right?
Well, nobody likes to know it all.
Right. And I say know-it-all, but that's really what we're talking about. We're kind of it's like a know-it-all in sheep's clothing, pretending
Right.
oh, I'm an expert or whatever, but that's really what you're doing.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's trying to get verification that you belong there and you can, So yeah, okay. So the third imposter syndrome is the natural genius. This is the type where you may feel a fraud simply because you don't believe that you're naturally intelligent or confident. If you don't get something right the first time around, or it takes you longer to master a skill, you feel like an imposter.
Yeah.
No, that's not something that I can really relate to very well. Because
I can relate to the intelligence side of it. Being in the legal field with people that you feel like are so much smarter than you. I've really had to kind of combat that because I would see these attorneys that were older than me and had a lot more experience, and they'd have a different analysis of the case or whatever it was. And I would be like, oh, well, I mean, they're older, so they must be right. And I've had to step back and look at that and think, well, just what do I think? I am just as intelligent as these people, and we took the same tests. We passed the same tests. We're both qualified. So I've had to step back and kind of give my own intelligence a little bit of credit and a little bit of confidence in myself that I did the proper research and I looked and all that. And I know that's not quite into the natural intelligence, but to me, it feels like it because it would indicate that I have the natural intelligence to figure out the analysis correctly, if that makes sense. So I get that completely.
I think this comes into play, like for me, the reason why I can't relate to it, not because I'm saying, oh, I'm not naturally intelligent, or I believe I'm naturally intelligent or anything like that. It's because I've always felt like kind of I wasn't. And so I always felt like in order for me to be where I want to be, I always had to just kind of learn. And so that's where like, I had to be like, so it wasn't like, for me, it wasn't about being intelligent or not, about if you belong in a room. It was always about how much you've grown.
Right.
A seat and grow through whatever, through the process to get a seat at the table. So that's something, that's why I'm saying I can't really relate to it, because I'm just like, well, I've never really believed intelligence had much to do with whether or not you have a right to have a seat at this table.
No, I totally agree with you, but I feel like it goes back to my childhood a little bit, because when I was being raised, and I think this is a good maxim to kind of go by a little bit, but I think it can be dangerous. My mother would always tell me, so she's a very tough love mother, if you couldn't tell by now. She would always tell me there's always someone smarter. There's always someone smarter. There's always someone prettier. There's always going to be that person. And you just need to work as hard as you could work, because there's always going to be that person. So that ingrained in me that I'm just an average intelligence and I'm not going to be the smartest person in the room. And I don't need to be the smartest person in the room, but I think it kind of innately put me in, towards the back of the pack in my mind, as a default. And so I think it is good to recognize you're not the smartest person in every room, nor should you be, but it doesn't also mean that you are not gifted or intelligent in a certain way.
Right. And that's what we're talking about as far as finding your superpower and all of that. And I'm going to go through the next two pretty quickly. The next one is the soloist. It's also possible to feel like an imposter if you had to ask for help to reach a certain level or status. Since you couldn't get there on your own, you question your competence or abilities. Like, and I think that's what we're alluding to before, people who feel like, oh, this was luck, or I was just at the right place at the right time, or I knew the right person. You
Right.
feel like, oh, I got here because, or because of my daddy or my, or, you know, I got here because of that, versus your own competence.
Yeah, I think this is made worse by the myth of the self-made man.
Right.
Because if you listen to biographies of these titans of industry or these people that have made big, big waves, none of them were actually self-made. Most of them, if not all, had a mentor that they looked up to, that they imitated. They had an advisor that they listened to, or they had a competitor that inspired them to like take a different path or do things differently. So I think we need to get rid of this myth of the self-made man, because it doesn't exist and no one gets to success on their own.
Right. Very, very good point. And the last type is called the super person. And this is the type of imposter syndrome where somebody believes that you must be the hardest worker. And I think I can relate to this. Maybe you can too. Or, and if you don't, then you're a fraud, right? If you're not the highest workers, if you haven't achieved the highest levels of achievement possible. And of course, there's always more achievement. I mean, I've worked with presidents or ex-presidents, and there's always, that's never like, you think, oh, this is it, I've done it. Nope, there's always another mountain that's higher. So it's not very actually gonna, get there. I'm done, I've achieved, it's never. So that I kind of relate to, like, and I think a lot of women, maybe high achieving women as well, could relate to it. I studied more than anybody I knew in my class, or at least, I mean, there was one other girl who was valedictorian who was also in the library with me, but I always felt like I had to be the hardest worker in order to what I wanted to achieve.
Yeah, I did that too. I did it in law school, and it's kind of just who I am. I mean, I like to work. And so when you take on work and you like to work, you just keep doing it. But then it starts to kind of be this belief in your mind that if you're not doing this, then you're not achieving anything. I mean, I was on law review, and I was also on the trial team, and I was, and I was also married. And then I, had an internship, and then I had a baby my second year of law school. And, so it's like all of this stuff is like, why are you doing this to yourself? I did enjoy it, but you're right. At some point you see something that you want and you think, okay, I want to go get it. And then when you achieve it, you realize, okay, well, now there's another level beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say something and then I lost it. But anyway, so why is it so important to recognize it as it being the imposter syndrome, as the kryptonite to finding your superpower, right? Why? Because it is actually stopping you from really seeing your authentic self. Because some common characteristics of imposter syndrome that affect your ability to find your superpower is an inability to realistically assess your competence and skills, because you're always thinking, oh, it's luck, or it's because, I am whatever, I had to work hard for it, or, I have to be an expert, rather than, no, this is actually, so that was actually what I was going to say when you said that. You're naturally inclined to do certain things. Right. And yes, and there's maybe a motivation or a fear. If you don't do it, you won't achieve.
Right.
But you wouldn't do it in the first place. Like you said, I'm naturally inclined to work hard or to put my head down. And that's a skill, right? So we start to attributing your success to external factors stops you from finding your superpower as it relates to the imposter syndrome. Rating your performance. Oh, yes. I missed an I, and I know you do this, Kathleen. I forgot to cross a T. Oh, I'm going to be found out. Like, no one cares. Yeah. Fear that you won't live up to expectations, whatever it is, expectations of your own self based on your childhood background or whatever culture, expectation obviously from others. All that is going to stop you to finding your authentic self and your superpower. Right. Obviously overachieving as well is actually a characteristic of imposter syndrome. So I think we all have that, at least, that people that are listening to this. And again, when we're talking about overachieving, I know we say a lot about work and working outside of the home, but it could also be related to people that work inside the home as
Oh,
well.
absolutely.
I mean, I see that all the time. Oh, I'm a housewife or homemaker. Everything has to be perfect, and especially around the holidays, like
Yep.
constantly.
Super mom.
Yeah.
Those super moms. I mean, I don't know how they do it. I think I'd be in a corner with a bottle of vodka somewhere.
I do. I think actually if I didn't work, I would be like that because I would feel like there, like
That would be your work.
Yeah.
That would be, yeah. Yeah.
Sabotaging your own success. That's also a characteristic.
Yes.
Self-doubt, setting very challenging goals and feeling disappointed when you fall short. I actually see this quite a lot in what I do.
Yes, I have done this.
Right.
I have done this.
Can you give us an example? What would you like to share?
I have seen this in, so when I'm in my business and I'm running my law firm as my business, I have had times where I have set monetary goals for growth, very aggressive ones. And then ultimately I don't reach those. And then I feel bad about myself because I'm like, well, I'm never going to get there and I'm never going to, but in the meantime, it's not like I didn't grow. I did. I just didn't grow 2 times over what I did last year, but I still grew, and so making these goals that probably are not realistic, are super challenging. If I was going to be able to achieve them, I would probably have to just have an insane drive, and probably push my staff to the breaking point, those sorts of things, like things that are really not achievable and are really not good in the long run. Or you could even compare it to like, well, I'm going to lose 40 pounds in the next 6 months. Okay, well, that's a pretty high goal, and that's going to take a whole lot of dedication, and you're going to have to be like on level 10 all the time. And then you don't get there, or you fall off in a couple of weeks, and you're like, okay, well, can't do it. I'm just,
right. So I see this a lot in people setting such high goals from where they are for the currently are, almost, I don't want to say on purpose, but subconsciously knowing they're not going to meet it. So they don't have to try. I mean, I worked with somebody who came to me and her business was basically barely making, 100,000, if that. And she wanted to go 1 million in a year. And I was like, you're literally setting yourself up for failure and it. Because if you make it, you're dead serious about it. If that is really your goal, you don't even have to try because it's so outside of what you conceivably have. I don't care if you work 168 hours a week, which is the number of hours we have in a week, and do nothing else. You're not going to be able to get there. And she knows it, and it's on a subconscious basis. So she doesn't even really have to try or do some of the different changes. So how do you combat that? Is you say, okay, let's make 3 different levels of goals. Like you were saying, level 10. What is easiest, simplest, most thing? You just know, like in your sleep, you'll be able to do X.
Right.
Going back to your diet example, maybe I know that for sure I can cut out, sugary drinks. Like I know that's one thing that's not going to be really hard for me to do, and I can do it. Okay, that's the base.
Right.
Then you do it a little bit higher. What's the medium? It's a little harder, maybe a little more challenging, but it's still within your reach.
Right.
And then, whatever the ultimate goal is, where if, I want to work out 7 days a week, and that would be awesome if I can do that, but it's just so much more challenging and you may not get to it. Setting those 3 realistic expectations for yourself could also be super helpful, I find.
Right. Well, it gives us an out when we make like a really big goal that we know we're never going to be able to do. It gives us an out to not hold ourselves to a higher level, to not hold ourselves to what is doable. Because if it's this huge goal, it's like, oh, well, it's unattainable. Like nobody can do it. But whereas if it's a small goal, that's something that you can do. Yeah. You don't really have a good excuse why you didn't do it.
Right. And you have to get out of your comfort zone, and you got to change things, and now you actually have to work because it is within your grasp, but it's not status quo. Right.
Right. which is part of, I think, falls into this imposter syndrome, where if I'm moving out of my comfort zone, and let's use the working out example. If I'm moving into, if I don't go to the gym, now I'm going to the gym. Well, I feel like an imposter in the gym. I don't work out. I'm not used to doing this. I'm not a fitness buff. I'm not that. Okay. I feel like a total imposter. So I'm out of my comfort zone. People are going to find out that I've never done this, whatever it is. But I think there are ways that tools that you can use to combat that, because and this is going back to the work that I've been trying to do. If there's something that I want to do, if there's a room that I want to be in, I have decided I belong in that room. I've just decided I belong in that room. So I need to get rid of the imposter syndrome. And how do I do that? How do I move forward and all of that sort of thing? But I think you do have to make a decision, and it's going to be scary, because imposter syndrome, again, is based on fear. You're afraid to be found out. So how do we move past it?
Right. One of my favorite quotes, and you just reminded me of it, and I have it right here taped to my computer, is, and this could help maybe a lot of people, is to think it's easier to, and I don't know who said this. I can't find, who did this quote, but it's easier to act yourself into a new way of thinking than to think yourself into a new way of acting.
Yes.
So what you said just really reminded me that I've just made a decision, and I'm going to act on it. And I'm going to be in this room. Even if I don't feel or think I belong, I'm still, and I hate saying act, what is it? Fake it until you make it. I don't believe in that, but I do.
I don't either.
I do believe that you say to yourself, I actually believe I should be in here. And even if you have some fear around it,
right,
you're still going to do it.
Right. The fear's still there. You just have to step through it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So all these characteristics we just talked about hinder, our ability to lean in.
That's right.
To our superpower, right? It hinders your ability to lean into your superpower.
Right.
So what impact does imposter syndrome have? So a lot of times I think why some of us have this is because it does fuel motivation. The fear fuels motivation, but there's a cost. There's always a cost.
Yep. There is a cost. I feel like it's a bit of a
self-fulfilling. The cost is what?
The cost is that you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve.
Right.
I mean, that's just,
the cost is, I think, is the experience is this constant anxiety, this constant.
Well, it is anxiety inducing completely. Yes. Because you're constantly afraid you're going to be found out. Right. And I feel like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when you're doing these things when you feel like you're not good enough, and then you're doing these things to try to cover that insecurity, the people around you know this is not authentic. The people around you can feel the inauthenticity of whatever it is you're doing, of however it is you're acting. And in that way, you then look like a fraud.
Right.
In that way, you then look like an imposter. So the very thing we ended up being afraid was going to happen, we would be found out, is now happening. We are found out because we didn't step into our own superpower. We didn't step into owning our strengths, and we let our self-doubt take over, and everybody figured out that we had this self-doubt, and now it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You are viewed as an imposter.
Right. So like you have this fear, it fuels your motivation, which you think, I need this to do what I need to do to get to where I want to get. But then as you're overachieving and over preparing much harder than necessary, because you want to make sure that nobody finds you out as a fraud. The whole time you're feeling this anxiety, it gets worse, you get depression, and then you get into this vicious cycle.
Yes.
I've been a part of, and I'm trying to get out of, is, you think that the only reason I survived this, or the only reason I got through law school, is because I overachieved, overworked myself to death. Like you were talking about, you got all, family and this, and, all these clubs or whatever you were involved in, groups. And you just start getting to this vision and thinking that is the reason for your success, versus, no, this is my superpower. This is my natural ability. I know
Right.
I can do it, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And I think when you're drawn to certain things, I just kind of want to throw this out there. I think when you're drawn to certain things, I think that's an indication that you're moving into your strength and that you should embrace it. Because there's a lot of things that I've wanted to do and I felt drawn to do. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know anything about that. Or and I think I'm drawn to those things because it plays into my strengths and the things that I'm good at and the things that will put me into that room that I want to be in.
Right.
I just want to throw that out there.
Right. So, but the problem with imposter syndrome is that the experience of doing well, because of this fear and the vicious cycle we just talked about, doing well at something and you having to overachieve and overwork yourself more just to make sure you're not found out as a fraud,
Right.
does nothing to change your beliefs.
Right.
And so, and what you believe, i.e., think about yourself,
Yes.
affects your ability to find your authentic self, hence your superpower.
Yes. Agreed.
That is why it is the kryptonite to finding your superpower.
Right. Well, it plays into that self-talk, right? The things that you tell yourself about yourself becomes reality.
Yep. Yeah. So this thought still is in your head, what gives me the right to be here? The more you accomplish, the more you feel like a fraud, because there's not, you can't internalize your experiences or success.
Right. Right. Because you're externalizing it. You're saying it's because of luck, or it's because this person did this thing.
I
Or this person
overwork.
helped
For me,
me.
it was always about the overworking part.
Right. Right.
That's what got me here versus no, like I have a right to be here. I believe that this is that this is part of my superpower, that I belong here. And it's not based on over preparing over this, for that, doing that, or who I know, or, or
well, I have a question for you. And I'm thinking about this. So when we're talking about this internal self-thought and this doubt and doing these things that don't serve us in order to make up for our imposter syndrome, it almost sounds like these are things that it's almost like and tell me if you disagree, because I want to know. It almost sounds like it's a white knuckling sort of thing, and that will only last or be successful for a certain period of time, and then it's not going to work anymore. Like if I'm white knuckling and let's say I want to be chair of a community organization, and I've white knuckled and I've, pushed through my imposter syndrome and I've become whatever it is I think they want me to be. And now I'm the chair. Is that going to serve me as the chair now that I have more responsibility and more pressure and all of that sort of thing? Is the white knuckling going to serve me in that position, or is it going to ultimately lead to failure on my part because I haven't done the work that I need to do in order to fulfill this position? Does that make sense?
A little bit. I don't know if I'm really following you, but I think what you're saying is, hey, I white knuckled my way to the top, and now I'm at the top, and I feel
will
like
the self-doubt become crippling?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Will the self-doubt become crippling? I think.
Right. And I think as well in multiple ways. Either you just, whatever people say, you feel like people are always judging you, or you become paranoid, or what most likely typically happens is you burn out.
Oh, yeah.
You can't keep it up. And that's actually what happened with me when I was, growing my firm. I grew it really, really quickly in a really short period of time. I had 2 kids. I was a single mom at the time. Even though I was married, he was in the military and he wasn't around. So I considered myself a single mom for most of it, or for really all of it. And then, and it was just so much that I ended up eventually hitting the wall with my health. I was very young and got a very, very serious disease. I got a very serious brain infection, and no one could understand. I had no predisposition. I had nothing wrong with me in any way, shape, or form up until that time. why that happened. So that's really what propelled me to kind of change course and move into what I'm doing now, to let people know there's never a good ending to this. The overachieving, thinking you want to do it all, the not really like believing that this is, or finding your superpower and leaning into it, is absolutely not if, but it will when. It's just a matter of time. You're going to hit a wall, and sometimes it could be super, super serious. And even for me, after I hit that wall and I was hospitalized for a month, and I came out of it, and they told me you're, lucky to be alive, I still went back to it. I couldn't stop. And it wasn't, and then I relapsed, and I kept having to go back, and I couldn't stop. And all my staff was putting timers because they only wanted me to work 4 hours a day. And I was like, it takes me 4 hours a day just to read through emails. Like, what are you talking about? And everybody was like, it's time to go home. And eventually my doctor said, look, it's either your health or your business. And if you don't sell your business or close it down, and it was doing really, really well at that point, I had literally white knuckle bared it. I mean, I killed myself. I would only get like maybe 2-3 hours of sleep a night, and I'm not exaggerating.
Wow.
It was like a death to me, and I obviously made the choice to sell it and what have you, and I had to go on disability for a while. But what I'm telling you is this is just never, ever sustainable. And it's not just my experience. I went into this line of business. I'm experiencing it with other people as well. And I feel like that is my voice to this world, to everybody that's listening, everybody I get in contact with. My legacy is letting you guys know what happens if you don't stop the hamster wheel.
Right. That's what I was thinking. And that's kind of what and thank you for sharing that. Because that's the sense that I was getting, was this is not a long-term solution. This is not sustainable. And at some point it's going to fail you in a number of ways. And I mean, it failed you in your health and all that sort of stuff. Right. And so I'm glad you were able to get past that.
And they just, and I went to Mayo, and they did studies on me and all sorts of stuff, and they couldn't figure out why. And eventually they just chalked it up to stress. And I do think stress a lot to do with like shutting down your immune system, just constantly being on adrenaline and cortisol. It's going to break you down. And for me, it broke down my immune system. The infection got into my spinal cord, and that's where I ended up. So, like what we're doing here may seem kind of lighthearted or whatever, but there are some really serious consequences to knowing or leaning into or having a sense of, getting off that hamster's wheel, looking at the 10,000 foot view, and really prioritizing what truly is important. And I think the imposter has a lot to do with us being on that wheel and constantly feeling, no, I need to do more, I need to do more, I need to do more, because otherwise I'll be found out, or I'm not who I am, and I'm not good enough, or whatever you say to yourself.
Right.
So I want to end with how to get past imposter syndrome. So it helps to start asking yourself some hard questions, and I'm going to just kind of go through some questions. And this is from, again, a resource that I found that I will put in the show notes. One is, what core beliefs do I hold about myself? It's all about believing in yourself. Do I believe I am worthy of love, as I am?
Yeah.
Must I be perfect for others to approve of me? Okay, so those are some questions. Some strategies to cope with imposter feeling include talking about what you're experiencing. And, we're going to have, a forum, I think a Facebook page or something, where we're going to make it a safe place for you guys to talk if you have, if you want to share. And you can even share anonymously, right?
Yes.
Questioning your negative thoughts. And a very important, and I've literally experienced this with one of my clients, avoiding comparing yourself to others.
It's hard to do.
Right, but it's absolutely necessary, because you're your own person, and you have your own skill set, you have your own superpowers. And especially when I've done it, and sometimes it's hard to see, but I've worked with over 400 law firms and other companies, and there's not one single CEO of any or owner of any of those that has the same mindset, same background, same
Right.
goals, same. So whether you're comparing yourself to something that's
Right.
like complete, you think they're like you, but they're not.
Right. It's apples and oranges.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
we're comparing to something that for sure you're going to fail at because they're nowhere near to
Right.
what you're experiencing in your life, or even what your goals can be, depending on where you are at that time.
Right.
Something to remember is that if you're feeling like an imposter, it means that you have some degree of success in your life and you're attributing it to luck or to other factors. So instead of, instead, if we could turn that feeling into one of gratitude. I think gratitude, and I followed a lot of very successful people.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the common thread that I see.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what you have accomplished in your life and be grateful. Instead of saying, oh, it's because I worked 1,000 hours, or it's because of luck, or because, oh, I knew this person that knew this person. No, look at it and be grateful for your achievements.
Yeah.
Don't be held back by your fear of being found out. Instead, lean into that feeling so that, let it get some root, right? And let your guard down and allow others to see the real you, which I think is really important. And I think that's why this podcast is so important. And then the resources we're going to have afterward, because a lot of people, especially in this world, don't have a place to, or people around them that they feel like they can really let their guard down and have them see the real, even your partner, right? Even like
sometimes.
So
well, the other thing too is not just the imposter syndrome, but an imposter syndrome can make you feel very isolated when you let your guard down. And I'm the queen of having guards up, by the way. But when you let your guard down and you let other people see you and your faults, which, by the way, your faults make you really interesting, people will connect with you more, because they feel like you're more like them. And so instead of being worried that people are going to find out that you're not perfect, I think you'll find that people will feel more connected to you, knowing that you're not perfect and knowing that you've come through some, trials and tribulations and that sort of thing. So don't be afraid.
All right. So we're just going to kind of end it on that note. I think this was I hope everybody found this. I really enjoyed this podcast. I found it was too helpful. We're going to post our resources in the notes section, right? There's a lot of resources that I turned to in preparing for the episode today. Kathleen, where can they find us?
Well, you can find us anywhere where you have find your podcast, Apple or Spotify, and we will be posting content on our YouTube page or our YouTube channel. So please subscribe and follow that. And as always, warriors, we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.